The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand courtyard of Kensington Palace as 10-year-old Prince George walked toward the main entrance with his protection officer, Detective Inspector James Mitchell. It was a crisp autumn day in October 2023, and the young prince had just finished his private tutoring session on British history. His backpack hung loosely over one shoulder, filled with textbooks and notebooks that any ordinary child might carry to school. Prince George had always been different from what people expected. While the media often painted royal children as privileged and distant, those who worked closely with the family knew better. The third in line to the throne possessed something that couldn't be taught in any royal protocol class: genuine empathy and a natural ability to see people as individuals rather than their job titles. As they approached the palace entrance, Prince George noticed something unusual. Near the staff quarters, a group of palace guards had gathered around someone sitting on a wooden bench. The gathering looked tense, and voices carried across the courtyard in hushed but urgent tones. Most people would have simply walked past, but Prince George stopped in his tracks. "What's happening over there, James?" the young prince asked, his curious eyes fixed on the scene unfolding about 50 meters away. Detective Inspector Mitchell glanced toward the commotion and recognized the situation immediately. "It appears to be a staff matter. Your Royal Highness, we should continue inside." But Prince George didn't move. His keen observation skills, honed through years of watching people during royal engagements, told him this wasn't just any staff matter. One of the guards was sitting with his head in his hands while others stood around him in what appeared to be an intervention of sorts. The body language spoke of concern, frustration, and perhaps disappointment. "Someone looks upset," Prince George said simply. "Shouldn't we check if they're okay?" The protection officer felt the familiar tug between his duty to maintain royal protocol and his growing respect for this young prince's character. In his 15 years of royal protection service, he had worked with many members of the royal family. Most were kind and well-intentioned, but Prince George possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense when something was wrong and an irrepressible urge to help fix it. "Your Royal Highness, palace staff have their own support systems for handling personal matters," Mitchell explained gently. "It would be highly unusual for—" "But what if they need help right now?" Prince George interrupted, not with the petulance of a spoiled child, but with the earnest concern of someone who genuinely cared. "We don't have to get involved, but we could at least find out what's wrong." As they stood there, more details of the situation became apparent. The guard sitting on the bench was Sergeant Robert Thompson, a man in his early 40s who had served the royal household for over 12 years. He was known throughout the palace as someone who took his duties seriously, never missed a shift, and always maintained the highest standards of professionalism. Seeing him in obvious distress was alarming to his colleagues. Prince George had encountered Sergeant Thompson many times over the years. The guard had been part of his security detail during various events and had always been kind, often sharing small jokes or interesting facts about the palace's history during long waits. Unlike some adults who spoke to him with forced cheerfulness or obvious nervousness, Sergeant Thompson had always treated him like a normal person while maintaining appropriate respect. "I remember him," Prince George said thoughtfully. "He's the one who told me about the secret passages in the palace. And he always asks about my football matches." The mention of their previous interactions seemed to settle something in the young prince's mind. This wasn't just any guard. This was someone who had been part of his daily life, someone who had shown him kindness and respect. The idea of walking past while that person was clearly in distress felt wrong to Prince George in a way that transcended royal protocol. "James, I want to go over there," he said with quiet determination. Detective Inspector Mitchell found himself in a delicate position. Royal protocol was clear about maintaining appropriate boundaries between family members and staff. However, He also understood that teaching young royals about compassion and leadership sometimes required flexibility. More importantly, he had come to understand that Prince George's instincts about people were rarely wrong. "Very well, Your Royal Highness," Mitchell said after a moment of consideration. "But we'll approach respectfully and follow your lead." As they walked across the courtyard, Prince George's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe someone in Sergeant Thompson's family was sick. Maybe he was in trouble at work. Maybe something had happened that was making him sad or worried. The young prince didn't know what he could do to help, but he knew that sometimes just showing you care can make a difference. The group of guards noticed them approaching and immediately straightened up, their faces shifting into formal expressions. This was exactly the kind of reaction that Prince George had learned to navigate throughout his young life, the way people suddenly became different when they remembered who he was. "Your Royal Highness," said Chief Inspector Williams, the senior guard among the group. "We didn't expect. Is there anything you need?" Prince George looked past the formalities directly at Sergeant Thompson, who had looked up with red-rimmed eyes and obvious embarrassment. The man started to stand, probably to bow or salute, but Prince George held up a small hand. "Please don't get up," he said gently. "I just noticed you seemed upset and wanted to make sure you're okay." The simplicity of the statement hung in the air. Here was a future king, stopping his day to check on the well-being of a palace guard. The other guards exchanged glances, unsure of how to handle this unprecedented situation. In all their years of service, none of them had experienced anything quite like this. Sergeant Thompson's composure cracked slightly. "Your Royal Highness, this isn't... You shouldn't have to concern yourself with..." "But I want to," Prince George said, and there was something in his voice that made it clear this wasn't just polite royal concern. "You've always been kind to me. If something's wrong, maybe there's something I can do to help." The wall of formal protocol that typically surrounded such interactions began to crumble. Chief Inspector Williams cleared his throat uncomfortably, but Sergeant Thompson looked directly at the young prince with a mixture of gratitude and desperation. "It's my son, Your Royal Highness," Thompson said quietly. "My boy Jack. He's 8 years old and he's very sick." Prince George's expression immediately became more serious, but not in the practiced way of someone performing royal duty. This was the genuine concern of one child thinking about another child in trouble. "What kind of sick?" he asked, stepping closer despite Detective Inspector Mitchell's subtle attempt to maintain distance. "Leukemia," Thompson said, the word seeming to take enormous effort to pronounce. "We found out 3 weeks ago. The doctors say he needs treatment that we can't afford. Special treatment that might save his life." The financial reality hit the assembled group like a physical blow. Everyone present understood the impossible situation facing the Thompson family. Palace guards were well paid by normal standards, but catastrophic medical expenses could bankrupt anyone. Private health care for childhood cancer was astronomically expensive, and while the National Health Service provided excellent basic care, some cutting-edge treatments remained out of reach for ordinary families. Prince George absorbed this information with the solemnity of someone much older than his 10 years. He had been learning about the responsibilities of leadership and the importance of using privilege to help others. His parents had taught him that being royal wasn't just about ceremonies and public appearances. It was about service and making a real difference in people's lives. "How much does the treatment cost?" Prince George asked. The directness of the question surprised everyone. Most people, even well-meaning ones, offered sympathy or general support. But Prince George was already thinking practically about solutions. Sergeant Thompson looked uncomfortable discussing money with a member of the royal family, but Chief Inspector Williams stepped in. "The specialized treatment costs approximately £40,000, Your Royal Highness. It's experimental, but has shown remarkable success rates in cases like young Jack's. £40,000. To most people, it might as well have been 40 million. To the royal family, it was a relatively small sum, but Prince George understood that money alone wouldn't solve this situation. Palace protocol, public perception, and the delicate balance of royal involvement in private matters all complicated what seemed like a simple problem. But as Prince George stood there, looking at a man who had spent years protecting his family while his own family faced an impossible crisis, protocol seemed far less important than doing what was right. "I want to help," Prince George said simply. The words carried across the courtyard with surprising weight. Here was a child, speaking with the authority of someone who understood that having power meant using it responsibly. The guards around him recognized something significant happening, even if they couldn't quite name what it was. Sergeant Thompson's eyes filled with tears that he tried desperately to hide. "Your Royal Highness, I couldn't possibly ask you to. This isn't your responsibility." "You didn't ask," Prince George pointed out logically. "I'm offering. And it's not about responsibility. It's about helping someone who needs help." Detective Inspector Mitchell watched this exchange with growing amazement. In his years of royal protection, he had witnessed many acts of charity and public service. But this felt different, more personal and immediate. Prince George wasn't performing royal duty. He was simply being human in the most authentic way possible. The conversation continued as more details emerged. Jack Thompson was currently undergoing standard chemotherapy, but his doctors had identified him as a candidate for an innovative immunotherapy treatment available only through private health care. The treatment had an 80% success rate compared to the 50% chance offered by traditional methods. For a parent, those numbers represented the difference between hope and despair. Prince George listened to every detail with focused attention. He asked questions about Jack's interests, his school, his friends. He wanted to understand not just the medical situation, but the little boy behind it. This wasn't charity to him. It was about helping another child who happened to be facing something terrible. As the conversation progressed, other palace staff began to notice the unusual gathering. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit community of royal household employees that Prince George was personally involved in helping one of their colleagues. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People began approaching to offer their own support, whether financial contributions from their modest salaries or connections to medical professionals who might help. The demonstration of solidarity impressed Prince George deeply. He was learning that leadership wasn't just about having resources. It was about inspiring others to act on their better instincts. By showing that he cared about Sergeant Thompson's situation, he had given everyone else permission to care as well. "This is exactly what we should be doing," Prince George said to Detective Inspector Mitchell as they watched more people join the effort to help. "Using what we have to help people who need it." The protection officer nodded, understanding that he was witnessing something that would likely influence Prince George's approach to royal duty for the rest of his life. This wasn't about grand gestures or public ceremonies. It was about recognizing individual human need and responding with immediate practical help. As the afternoon wore on, Prince George's simple act of noticing someone in distress had mobilized an entire community. But he wasn't finished yet. His mind was already working on longer-term solutions that would go far beyond immediate financial help. He was beginning to understand that true leadership meant not just solving problems, but preventing them from happening to others in similar situations. The young prince's soft-hearted response to Sergeant Thompson's crisis was about to set in motion events that would change not only the Thompson family's future, but the entire palace's understanding of what royal service could mean in the modern world. The following morning brought an unusual energy to Kensington Palace. Word of Prince George's intervention on behalf of Sergeant Thompson had spread throughout the royal household. creating ripples of both admiration and concern among the staff. Royal protocol officers found themselves in uncharted territory, trying to navigate the implications of a 10-year-old prince taking personal responsibility for a staff member's family crisis. Prince George woke earlier than usual that Tuesday, his mind immediately returning to the Thompson family's situation. He had spent the previous evening researching childhood leukemia on his tablet, reading medical websites with the determined focus of someone far older than his years. The statistics were sobering, but the stories of successful treatment gave him hope. More importantly, he had begun formulating a plan that extended far beyond helping just one family. At breakfast, Prince George approached his parents with characteristic directness. Prince William and Catherine were reviewing their schedules for the day when their eldest son joined them at the dining table, carrying a folder of printed materials about childhood cancer treatment. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something important," Prince George said, settling into his chair with unusual formality. Catherine looked up from her morning tea, immediately recognizing the serious expression that meant her son had been thinking deeply about something. "Of course, darling. What's on your mind?" Prince William set aside his newspaper, giving his son full attention. Over the years, he had learned to take Prince George's concerns seriously. The boy had an uncanny ability to identify real problems and think through practical solutions. "Yesterday I met a guard whose son has leukemia," Prince George began, opening his folder and spreading out the papers he had printed. "His name is Sergeant Thompson, and his little boy Jack needs special treatment that costs £40,000. Without it, Jack might die." The stark simplicity of the statement hung in the air. Prince William and Catherine exchanged glances, recognizing the moral complexity of the situation their son was presenting. Royal involvement in individual staff members' personal crises was unprecedented, but they also understood their son's character well enough to know this wasn't a passing concern. "That's a terrible situation for any family to face," Catherine said gently. "What are you thinking we should do?" Prince George pulled out a handwritten list, his careful penmanship revealing the thought he had put into his proposal. "I want to pay for Jack's treatment from my trust fund, but I also want us to create something bigger, a fund that helps other palace workers and their families when they face medical emergencies they can't afford." The request was both simple and revolutionary. Prince William felt a surge of pride at his son's compassion, combined with concern about the precedent such action might set. Royal finances were carefully managed and publicly scrutinized. Every expenditure, particularly those involving charitable giving, required consideration of multiple factors, including public perception, legal implications, and long-term sustainability. "George, that's a wonderfully generous impulse," Prince William said carefully. "But we need to think through all the implications. Royal charity has to be handled very carefully to avoid creating problems." "What kind of problems?" Prince George asked, genuinely curious rather than defensive. Catherine took over the explanation, understanding that her son needed to learn about the complex realities of royal responsibility. "When we help one person, others might feel entitled to the same help. If we pay for one medical treatment, people might expect us to pay for all of them. And there are questions about fairness. Why this person and not others who might need help just as much?" Prince George considered this seriously. He had not thought about the broader implications of his desire to help, but he could see the logic in his mother's concerns. However, instead of discouraging him, the complexity of the issue seemed to energize him. "Then we make it fair," he said with the confident problem-solving attitude that had impressed his tutors. "We create rules about who qualifies and how much we help. We make it about medical emergencies for palace staff and their children. We set limits so it's sustainable. And we involve other people so it's not just us making decisions." Prince William looked at his son with growing amazement. The 10-year-old was essentially proposing the creation of a formal charitable foundation with clear governance structures and eligibility criteria. It was exactly the kind of systematic thinking that effective leadership required. "You've really thought this through," Prince William said, "but there's still the question of publicity. If the media finds out we're paying for staff medical expenses, they might criticize us for showing favoritism or create a circus around private medical information." This concern struck at the heart of royal life in the modern era. Every action by family members was subject to intense scrutiny and interpretation. Well-intentioned charity could be twisted into negative narratives about royal privilege or inappropriate involvement in private matters. Prince George frowned, understanding the problem but refusing to accept it as insurmountable. "What if we do it quietly? No publicity, no announcements, just help when people need help. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" The question cut through all the protocol concerns to the fundamental purpose of royal service. Catherine felt her heart swell with pride at her son's moral clarity. He understood intuitively that duty meant action, not just ceremony. "You're right about what we should do," Catherine said. "Let me talk to some people about how we can do it properly." Over the next several hours, a series of discreet consultations took place throughout the palace. Catherine contacted the family's legal advisors, financial managers, and senior household staff to explore the feasibility of Prince George's proposal. The response was universally positive, with several advisors noting that such a fund would demonstrate exactly the kind of modern royal leadership that connected the monarchy to real human needs. By afternoon, the framework for what would become known internally as the Royal Household Emergency Medical Fund had been outlined. Prince George's trust fund would provide initial capital, supplemented by contributions from other family members and voluntary donations from palace staff who wanted to participate. A small committee would review requests and determine eligibility, ensuring both fairness and confidentiality. Meanwhile, Prince George had returned to the palace courtyard, hoping to find Sergeant Thompson and update him on the developing plans. What he found instead was a scene that surprised and moved him deeply. The wooden bench where Thompson had sat in despair the day before was now surrounded by a steady stream of palace workers, each stopping to leave envelopes or speak quietly with Chief Inspector Williams, who appeared to be coordinating some kind of collection effort. "What's happening?" Prince George asked as he approached with Detective Inspector Mitchell. Chief Inspector Williams turned with obvious relief at seeing the young prince. "Your Royal Highness, word of your kindness yesterday has inspired something remarkable. The entire staff has organized to help the Thompson family. We've raised over £8,000 in less than 24 hours. Prince George stared at the growing pile of envelopes, each representing someone choosing to help a colleague in need. Maintenance workers, kitchen staff, gardeners, security personnel, administrative assistants, people from every level and department of the palace operation had contributed what they could afford. £8,000 from the staff? Prince George asked, clearly amazed. "More than that, Your Royal Highness," Williams continued. "People are offering overtime hours to donate the extra pay, organizing bake sales, even reaching out to former colleagues who have left royal service. Mrs. Henderson from the kitchen staff has a cousin who works in medical supplies. She's exploring whether she can get some of Jack's medications at reduced cost." The demonstration of collective caring overwhelmed Prince George. His simple act of noticing someone's pain had awakened something beautiful in the palace community. People who rarely interacted across departmental lines were working together toward a common goal. The hierarchy that normally structured palace life had temporarily dissolved into something more human and immediate. "This is incredible," Prince George said, and his voice carried a note of wonder that made several nearby staff members smile. "Everyone cares so much about Sergeant Thompson's family." "Not just his family, Your Royal Highness," said Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper who had just approached with another envelope. "We care because you showed us it was right to care. We've all been so focused on our jobs that we sometimes forget we're a community. Yesterday reminded us that we're supposed to look after each other." The comment hit Prince George with unexpected force. He was beginning to understand that leadership wasn't just about having power or resources. It was about giving other people permission to be their best selves. By showing that he valued Sergeant Thompson as a person, rather than just a guard, he had encouraged everyone else to see their colleagues as full human beings, deserving of support and compassion. As the afternoon progressed, more details of the grassroots effort emerged. The palace chaplain had reached out to local churches, several of which had offered prayer support and small financial contributions. The head gardener had contacted a charity that supported families facing childhood cancer, providing information about additional resources and support groups. Even Prince George's own tutors had quietly contributed, touched by their students' example of practical compassion. When Sergeant Thompson arrived for his evening shift, he walked into an environment transformed by collective goodwill. The man who had sat alone in despair just 24 hours earlier found himself surrounded by colleagues eager to offer support, encouragement, and practical help. The emotional weight of facing his son's illness alone had been replaced by the strength of a community united in common purpose. Prince George was waiting in the main entrance when Thompson arrived, having arranged to be there specifically to share the developing plans for long-term support. The guard's expression upon seeing the young prince was a mixture of gratitude, amazement, and something approaching awe. "Your Royal Highness, I don't know how to thank you," Thompson began, but Prince George cut him off gently. "You don't need to thank me," the prince said. "We're going to make sure Jack gets the treatment he needs. But more than that, we're going to make sure no other palace family has to face this kind of crisis alone." The promise carried weight beyond its simple words. Prince George was learning that true leadership meant not just responding to individual crises, but creating systems that prevented future suffering. His parents had taught him that royal privilege came with the responsibility to use that privilege for the benefit of others, and he was beginning to understand how to translate that principle into action. As they spoke, Prince George noticed something else that filled him with pride. Throughout the entrance hall, staff members were stopping to speak with Sergeant Thompson, not with the awkward sympathy that often accompanies tragedy, but with the easy camaraderie of people who had chosen to stand together. The collective response to one family's crisis had strengthened the bonds within the entire palace community. "Jack's going to get better," Prince George said with the confident faith of someone too young to fully understand the complexities of medical prognosis. "And when he does, maybe he'd like to visit the palace. I'd like to meet him." The offer was characteristic of Prince George's approach to helping others. It extended beyond crisis response to building genuine relationships. He wasn't interested in charity that maintained distance between giver and receiver. Instead, he wanted to create connections that recognized the fundamental equality and dignity of all people, regardless of their position or circumstances. Sergeant Thompson's eyes filled with tears he no longer tried to hide. "Your Royal Highness, you've already given my family more hope than I thought possible. Jack would be honored to meet you." As the evening progressed, Prince George reflected on everything that had happened since he first noticed someone in distress. In less than 48 hours, his simple impulse to help had mobilized an entire community, created the framework for ongoing support systems, and demonstrated the power of compassionate leadership to inspire others to action. But perhaps most importantly, he had learned that being royal meant more than ceremony and tradition. It meant using every advantage, every resource, and every opportunity to make life better for others. The soft-hearted move that had begun as concern for one guard's family crisis was evolving into a new understanding of what royal service could mean in the modern world. The transformation was just beginning, and its effects would reach far beyond anything Prince George could have imagined when he first decided to approach a man sitting alone on a wooden bench. 3 weeks later, Kensington Palace had quietly transformed into something unprecedented in royal history. The Royal Household Emergency Medical Fund was operational, with Prince George serving as its youngest patron and most passionate advocate. Word of the initiative had spread throughout royal households across the Commonwealth, inspiring similar programs at other palaces and royal residences. But the most profound changes were happening at the human level, in the daily interactions between people who had learned to see each other differently. Sergeant Thompson stood at his usual post near the main entrance, but everything about his demeanor had changed. The weight of desperation that had marked his shoulders 3 weeks earlier had been replaced by something lighter, not just relief about his son's improving medical situation, but a fundamental shift in how he understood his place within the royal household community. Jack Thompson's treatment was proceeding better than anyone had dared hope. The experimental immunotherapy had begun almost immediately after the fund was established, and early indicators suggested his young body was responding remarkably well. The 8-year-old boy, who had been listless and frightened, was beginning to show signs of his former energy and curiosity. But perhaps more significantly, the entire Thompson family had been embraced by a support network they never knew existed. Prince George maintained regular contact with the family, not through formal channels or public relations management, but through simple, direct communication that reflected his genuine interest in Jack's recovery. Every few days, he would stop during his palace walks to ask Sergeant Thompson about his son's progress, share stories from his own day, or pass along small gifts that might cheer up a boy facing difficult medical treatments. On this particular Thursday afternoon, Prince George was returning from a private meeting with several European child health advocates who had requested to learn about the palace's innovative staff support program. Word of the fund had leaked through diplomatic channels, and other royal households were seeking guidance on implementing similar initiatives. At 10 years old, Prince George was becoming an inadvertent expert on compassionate institutional leadership. As he walked through the main entrance with Detective Inspector Mitchell, Prince George noticed something that made him smile. Sergeant Thompson was engaged in animated conversation with Mrs. Chen, the head of palace maintenance, and 2 other staff members. They were gathered around Thompson's phone, clearly looking at photos and sharing in obvious joy about whatever they were seeing. "Good news?" Prince George asked as he approached the group. The staff members immediately straightened up, but their formal response was tempered by genuine warmth that had developed over the past weeks. The relationship between Prince George and the palace staff had evolved into something unique, respectful, but authentic, acknowledging hierarchy while embracing genuine human connection. "The best news, Your Royal Highness," Sergeant Thompson said, his face beaming with pride and gratitude. "Jack finished his 3rd treatment session yesterday, and the doctors say his response is exceeding all expectations. The cancer markers in his blood have dropped by 70%. The medical progress was extraordinary, but Prince George was equally moved by what he observed in the group dynamic. These staff members weren't just being polite about a colleague's good fortune. They were genuinely invested in Jack's recovery because they had become emotionally connected to his story. The collective effort to help one family had created lasting bonds throughout the palace community. "That's wonderful," Prince George said, and his joy was completely unguarded. "Can I see the photos?" Sergeant Thompson handed over his phone, showing pictures of Jack at the hospital children's ward. The boy looked thin and tired, but his smile was radiant as he posed with nurses, played games with other young patients, and proudly displayed cards and gifts that had arrived from palace staff members he had never met. In several photos, Jack wore a small pin featuring the royal coat of arms, a gift Prince George had sent during the first week of treatment. "He asks about you every day," Thompson said softly. "He wants to know if you're still planning to meet him when he's feeling better." "Of course," Prince George replied immediately. "Maybe next week, if the doctors think he's strong enough for visitors." The casual way Prince George discussed visiting a staff member's child represented a complete departure from traditional royal protocol. In previous generations, such personal involvement in employees' family situations would have been considered inappropriate boundary crossing. But Prince George's approach was creating new precedents based on authentic human relationships rather than artificial institutional barriers. Mrs. Chen stepped forward with obvious emotion in her voice. "Your Royal Highness, I hope you understand what your kindness has meant to all of us. Not just the Thompson family, but everyone who works here. You've shown us that we matter as people, not just as employees." The comment highlighted something Prince George hadn't fully anticipated when he first decided to help Sergeant Thompson. His actions had challenged everyone in the palace to reconsider their relationships with each other and their understanding of what community meant. Staff members who had worked alongside each other for years without knowing much about their personal lives were now actively supporting each other through various challenges and celebrations. "You all matter," Prince George said with simple conviction. "That's the whole point. We're supposed to take care of each other." Detective Inspector Mitchell watched this exchange with deep admiration for the young prince he was assigned to protect. In his 15 years of royal security work, he had witnessed many acts of official charity and public service. But Prince George's approach was different, more personal, more sustainable, and more transformative for everyone involved. As the group dispersed to return to their duties, Sergeant Thompson asked for a private word with Prince George. They walked toward a quiet corner of the entrance hall, where Thompson's formal composure finally gave way to profound emotion. "Your Royal Highness, I need you to understand something," he began, his voice thick with feeling. "3 weeks ago, I was sitting on that bench feeling like the world had abandoned my family. I thought I might have to leave my job to care for Jack full-time, which would have meant losing our health insurance right when we needed it most. I felt completely alone." Prince George listened intently, understanding that this conversation was important not just for Thompson, but for his own growing comprehension of leadership's real impact on individual lives. "When you stopped to ask if I was okay, everything changed," Thompson continued. "Not just because of the money, though that saved Jack's life, but because you showed me that I had value as a person, that my family's crisis mattered to someone I respected. You gave me hope when I had none." The guard paused, struggling to find adequate words for feelings that went beyond normal gratitude. "But it's more than that, Your Royal Highness. You've taught me what real leadership looks like. It's not about having power over people. It's about using whatever power you have to lift people up. You're 10 years old, and you already understand something about service that some people never learn." Prince George felt the weight of this assessment, not as pressure, but as recognition of the responsibility that came with his position. He was beginning to understand that being royal meant more than attending ceremonies or learning protocol. It meant consistently choosing to use privilege and resources for the benefit of others, especially when no one was watching or keeping score. "I just did what felt right," Prince George said quietly. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No, Your Royal Highness, they wouldn't have," Thompson replied with gentle firmness. "Most people would have walked past. Most people in your position would have referred the matter to appropriate channels and moved on. You stopped, you listened, and you acted. That's the difference between authority and leadership." The distinction struck Prince George as important. He had been learning about the difference between having power and using it wisely, between commanding respect and earning it through actions that demonstrated genuine care for others. As their conversation continued, other staff members began to gather nearby, not intrusively, but drawn by the obvious significance of the moment. Word had spread throughout the palace that Sergeant Thompson was expressing the gratitude that all of them felt toward Prince George for changing their workplace culture in ways both subtle and profound. Chief Inspector Williams approached with a formal bearing that barely contained deep emotion. Your Royal Highness, I speak for the entire security team when I say that your actions over the past weeks have earned our genuine respect in ways that go far beyond our professional duties. The comment represented something unprecedented in royal staff relations. These were career professionals who had served multiple generations of the royal family with complete loyalty and discretion. Their respect had always been given automatically as part of their service. But what Prince George had earned was something different: personal admiration based on character rather than position. We've always protected you because it's our job, Williams continued. But now we protect you because we believe in who you are as a person. You've shown us what kind of king you'll become, and we're honored to be part of preparing you for that responsibility. The spontaneous testimonial from these seasoned professionals moved Prince George deeply. He was learning that true leadership earned followers not through force or expectation, but through consistent demonstration of values that others wanted to support and emulate. Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Your Royal Highness, my own grandson has special needs, and watching you care for Jack Thompson has given me hope for what society can become when people choose kindness over indifference. One by one, staff members shared similar sentiments. The chef mentioned how Prince George's example had inspired him to organize cooking classes for staff children. The head gardener talked about starting a small garden project where employees could grow vegetables to supplement family grocery budgets. The librarian had begun a literacy program for staff members who wanted to improve their reading skills. Prince George realized he was witnessing something remarkable. His single act of compassion had created ripple effects throughout the entire palace community, inspiring others to find their own ways of helping and supporting each other. The Emergency Medical Fund had been just the beginning of a cultural transformation that was still expanding. This is what I hoped would happen, Prince George said, looking around at the assembled staff. Not the helping me part, but the helping each other part. We're all part of the same community. And communities work best when everyone takes care of everyone else. Detective Inspector Mitchell stepped forward to address the group. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's appropriate to acknowledge what we've all witnessed over the past weeks. His Royal Highness has demonstrated leadership qualities that many adults never develop. But more importantly, he's shown us that genuine service means seeing every person as worthy of dignity and support. The protection officer's words carried special weight because of his unique position. As someone responsible for Prince George's physical safety, he had observed the young prince's character more closely than almost anyone outside the immediate royal family. His endorsement was based on daily observation of how Prince George treated everyone from visiting dignitaries to maintenance workers with consistent respect and genuine interest. As the informal gathering concluded, Sergeant Thompson made one final statement that would be remembered by everyone present. Your Royal Highness, you asked me 3 weeks ago if I was okay. I want you to know that because of your kindness, not only am I okay, my whole family is going to be okay. Jack is getting better, we have hope for the future, and I wake up every day proud to serve someone who truly cares about the people around him. He paused, then continued with formal precision that somehow enhanced, rather than diminished, the emotional impact of his words. You have my genuine respect, not as a guard to a royal, but as one person to another. And you have my promise that I will spend the rest of my career making sure you're safe, because the world needs leaders like you. The simple declaration represented a transformation that went far beyond the original crisis that had brought them together. Prince George had learned that authentic leadership created genuine loyalty based on mutual respect and shared values. The staff had learned that hierarchy didn't have to mean emotional distance, and that their well-being mattered to the people they served. Most importantly, Everyone involved had discovered that small acts of kindness could create large changes in how communities function. Prince George's soft-hearted response to one man's distress had demonstrated that true strength lay not in maintaining formal distance, but in choosing connection and compassion even when it wasn't required. As the group dispersed, Prince George reflected on everything that had happened since that October afternoon when he first noticed someone sitting alone on a wooden bench. His simple decision to check on Sergeant Thompson's well-being had taught him more about leadership than any formal lesson could have provided. The young prince understood now that being royal meant more than inheriting titles or learning ceremonies. It meant consistently choosing to use whatever advantages he possessed to make life better for others, creating systems that supported people in crisis, and inspiring others to embrace their own capacity for kindness and service. 3 weeks after a soft-hearted move had quieted an entire palace with its unexpectedness, Prince George had earned something far more valuable than obedience or formal respect. He had earned genuine love from people who had chosen to follow his example because they believed in the kind of leader he was becoming. The guard who had left that wooden bench in despair was now standing proudly at his post, secure in the knowledge that he worked for someone who valued him as a complete human being. And throughout the palace, dozens of other staff members approached their daily duties with renewed sense of purpose, knowing they were part of a community that truly cared for each member's well-being. Prince George's transformation of royal service from ceremonial duty to practical compassion had created lasting change that would influence how the monarchy connected with ordinary people for generations to come. But perhaps most importantly, it had demonstrated that genuine leadership could emerge at any age when guided by authentic concern for others and the courage to act on that concern despite convention or protocol. The young prince who had noticed someone's pain and chosen to respond with kindness had learned that true strength lay in vulnerability, true authority came from service, and true respect was earned through consistent demonstration of care for others. These lessons would guide him for the rest of his life, shaping not just how he would eventually rule, but how he would continue to live each day with purpose and compassion.